everybody, to the Energy Realities podcast. We have a special guest who just disappeared, my cat. So welcome today. Hello to David Blackman, Irina Slav, and Stu Turley.
Howdy.
David, how are you today?
Oh, I'm just lovely. It's a beautiful day in Texas, as it always is, and just happy to be here with you guys.
Great, as it always is when there's no tornadoes going through or
It's
something.
just a beautiful day. Every day in Texas is a beautiful day as far as I'm concerned.
Excellent. Irina, how are you today in Bulgaria?
I'm good, thank you. And I really, really love David's attitude to the weather.
Rain or shine, it's beautiful where
It's
I
a
am.
beautiful day.
Yeah, I have to work on myself to develop this attitude, but I will. Thank you, David.
Well, I'm wondering because apparently it was the second hottest March on record again.
Oh, of course.
I
it
would
was.
like to know. Apparently in Europe.
No, it
My
wasn't.
house.
Hell no.
I know. I'm like,
No, it
where are
wasn't.
they getting
No.
this data? It's just ridiculous.
They make it
And
up.
we've got Stu Turley. Hi,
Hey.
Stu. How are you today?
Hola, ¿cómo está? Más trabajo en la ciudad de Dallas, eh?
Yo tambien.
And how's the weather where you are, Stu?
It was actually wonderful. I got to work in my garden. I got to work on my backhoe yesterday and throw rocks around. It is absolutely wonderful. Every man needs a backhoe.
For sure. Nothing like digging holes and filling them up again.
Oh, planting trees. I
Planting
planted
trees.
10 trees this year already. So
Wow. Hey, you can sell those as carbon offsets.
Yes.
It's all part of net zero.
I think scamming the global people with that is absolutely wonderful, but I'm not that kind of guy.
Hey, you can be part of the voluntary carbon market that Mark Carney's trying to set up. So that'll be fantastic.
I'm going to be rude for half of a second and say I don't want to have anything to do with that, man, but I'll just leave it at that.
Well, I'm Tammy Nemeth, and I guess I'm hosting today, as well as my cat Moxie, but she's now decided she's had enough and is having a nap. So hopefully she won't come and disturb us again. So today we're talking about Europe's net zero insanity reads like a Babylon Bee parody. And actually, it's a little bit more along the lines of how crazy all the EV stuff is and all these plants going out of business or subsidies being wasted. And then we've got in Europe where the European Union is agreeing on a floor price to sell Chinese EVs in Europe. And then there was also an article that was linked actually from something David sent around on Substack today. It was one of the other articles where it was Chinese car manufacturers are showing interest in purchasing 2 of the Volkswagen manufacturing plants in Germany. So imagine a Volkswagen plant being bought by a German company, a Chinese company, to produce Chinese EVs in the European Union. I don't see how this is going to end well for the Europeans. So,
Tammy,
what's your take?
Don't we have an example of failed Chinese purchases of steel companies?
Oh my gosh, yeah. So, I guess before we move on to the EVs in the UK, a Chinese company had bought British Steel a few years ago, and there's been criticisms that they weren't maintaining the facility properly, that they were possibly taking equipment out. That's one of the accusations out there. So on the weekend, there was an emergency meeting of Parliament where they sat on a Saturday. Oh my gosh.
Oh my gosh.
Parliamentarians coming in on a Saturday where they were discussing the possibility of nationalizing British Steel. And what ended up happening is that the government, apparently, I'm not quite sure the details, they're going to keep giving money to this Chinese company to keep British Steel open. They've paid for coal, even though Britain has a whole lot of coal. They paid for coal to be shipped supposedly from Japan to the UK to keep the steel plant operational. And it's just the craziest thing you've ever heard.
Now,
And I
is
said
this all about net zero? This is all about net. Are all of the policies in the UK really targeted to help drive a net zero economy?
Absolutely. And one of the big complaints about the steel company was that they're supposed to be converting it to an electric arc furnace, but everything is so expensive. The UK has the highest industrial electricity prices in the world. It's got for whatever reason extremely high natural gas prices, even though like the spot prices are quite low. For whatever reason, what people get charged in the UK is very expensive. So the company's like, well, the power prices, the electricity prices, it's all too much. And if you want us to convert to an electric arc, you're going to have to give us some subsidy or something. And so now they want to nationalize the company, but that hasn't been finalized, I have to say. Messy times. I'm not sure. They put it forward to maybe nationalize in the near future, but at the moment, it's this weird kind of hybrid where the UK government is giving the Chinese company a whole lot of money with no strings attached, really. And we'll see where that goes. But right now, that coal is sitting in harbor in the port in the UK, not being offloaded because the government actually hasn't paid the bill yet.
Tammy, let me throw this at you.
You can't make this stuff up.
Japan.
I know you can't make it up.
You can't make this up. And Japan has also closed their coking coal mines.
Yeah. Well, they have a few, I think, but not very many.
Yeah, and that gets to the point that the supposedly Japanese coal actually came to Japan from Australia, where it had been produced. Okay, that just makes the story even more insane.
And David, if it did, and Tammy, if it did, this is all about net zero. Net zero. Australia to Japan in a ore carrier would approximately be 2,043 metric tons of CO2 output. In Japan to the UK, it would be approximately 4,895 metric tons of CO2. So that's a total of 6,938 metric tons of CO2. So if they're rushing a bill through to emergency buy that coal, who's going to pay the extra fine for the CO2 carbon capture for all that extra tonnage of carbon for stupidity? I just asked.
Well, they'll tear down a forest to build a solar array to.
Oh, nice.
Well, they're covering up the farmland here,
right?
To put solar up. So
you can't buy this kind of entertainment. That even the Babylon Bee could not have made this story up.
Irina, what do you think of this crazy UK story?
Well, it's crazy. As you can see, I've been trying to not laugh out loud, but and yeah, the UK has gone a step ahead of the EU, but it's a small step with this coal story, because we have the EU trying to do business with China, wanting to do business with China. Less than a month after the so-called top diplomat of the European Union said that the EU needs to defeat China. On which front the EU needs to defeat China, I have no idea, but I think this woman needs to be removed from this post, because I understand that foreign diplomats are not taking her seriously, but she's still very highly incompetent and inadequate in every professional respect. So, it's pretty much the same story as it was with Russia before the war in Ukraine actually began, because on the one hand, the EU was cursing at Russia at every turn, and on the other hand, they were keeping those gas supplies coming because they need the gas. Now they're doing the same thing. They're trying. The big problem of the EU is that they seem to perceive geopolitics as a zero-sum game. If we're not with the US, we must be with China. Yeah. And one of the two would win. It's not a zero-sum game. This is such an infantile perception of geopolitics. and international relations and everything that stems from international relations. So they spent a lot of time, hyping uh, attempts to stand up to China, building new supply chains for the transition, for energy supply in general. We've all seen the news, we've seen the reports, we've read the quotes. Now suddenly they want to do a deal with China because the US is not playing along with the EU agenda.
Yeah.
And they're not even ashamed of it.
Yeah,
You're
well,
right. I mean, it's like Canada keeps talking about we want to have a coalition with trustworthy, reputable, reliable partners. Since when is China any of those things? And and now it's, the EU wants to do this deal with the EVs to have a floor price so that Chinese EVs when they come will be of a similar price as the European ones. Well, really? Who's gonna choose? Like, how is that gonna help consumers? Except it'll help the EU governments to say, well, we're having open competition, and the consumer will choose. Maybe that's their thinking. I don't know.
I don't know if there's any actual thinking involved in this whole thing, because if they make Chinese EVs as expensive as Europe made EVs, which was the original idea, they were considering tariffs on Chinese EVs. So, the European car makers had a chance.
Yeah,
But if they do this, if the Chinese agree to this, they'll just buy the factories of Volkswagen. By the way, they're going to buy two factories, so the other factories will be uh, switched into ammunition plants or something, because
I
those
don't know.
talk
I mean,
about that they need to rearm. They need to
yeah,
rearm, so they will be changing the purpose of factories, car making factories.
yeah, that's a really
They
great
want to
point because
make
they were talking
Volkswagen.
about that before. Yeah, like
Okay.
I mean, so this is China expressing interest in two factories, Volkswagen factories. But as you say, the EU before had talked about, well, as part of Rearm EU, we're going to retool these the automobile manufacturers. And I was thinking, okay, well, who's going to make the cars? But apparently,
Exactly.
it's
I know.
China.
China.
I don't know.
Yeah. 2 years
Well,
ago, I
David, what do you
interviewed
think of
this.
that?
I'm sorry, who?
Sorry, go ahead. I was going to ask you what you thought of this
Oh.
this craziness.
Yeah, so 2 years ago, I interviewed the CEO of a battery maker, an EV battery maker based in Europe, in Italy. And Italvote was the name of the company. The company is in bankruptcy, like most other EV battery making companies in Europe and everywhere else. But during that interview, he predicted, this was 2 years ago, he predicted within 5 years, China would completely dominate and overrun the European EV market because
For sure.
European companies simply can't compete. So this effort to establish a floor price for Chinese imports of electric vehicles into Europe is an attempt to keep the struggling European native companies alive and competing in the market. The buyout, but I mean, it's on track for China to dominate. China will cheat on the floor prices, and China will undersell European car makers every step of the way. It's inevitable. Their purchase of the two Volkswagen plants that they want to execute, those are the first two plants ever closed by Volkswagen in its history, right? Aren't those the same two plants they're talking about? Throughout its entire history, from when it was created in the 1930s under the Adolf Hitler government, Volkswagen has never been forced to close an auto manufacturing plant until now. Why did they have to close these plants? Because of the forced march to electric vehicles that they're being forced to go down. And they're trying to sell cars that people in Europe don't want to buy and can't afford. And so the solution from the EU to that issue, the lack of affordability of electric vehicles and the people's unwillingness to buy them is to force China to artificially raise the prices of its own cars coming into the market, right? Not to allow other car makers to come in and sell cheaper cars. They want them to be expensive because the real goal here is not to have everyone driving an electric vehicle. I mean, these people in positions of power understand that that's not going to happen. The goal here is to force the poorer classes of Europeans and Americans and everyone else in the free world, or what we used to call the free world, to stop driving, period. They want you out of cars by 2050. That's the real goal. And so all of this is just, more examples we see day after day after day of governments in the EU and in European countries and the UK pursuing that real goal to get you out of your cars, period. There will be electric vehicles, but they will only be available and affordable to upper classes, the wealthier classes of individuals. And, that's the way it's going to be unless somehow, some way, these people are thrown out of power. But as we also see across the European continent, that whenever a non-globalist actually wins an election or wants to stand for an election, the elections are invalidated by the courts or they are prosecuted, as we see in France. They're prosecuted before they can actually stand for election again. And so this is all very transparent. It's easy to see. It's not a secret here. It's all very transparent and visible. And yet there doesn't seem to be any way to stop it. Even when, like Geert Wilders gets into power in the Netherlands, he's unable, it takes him a year just to form a government. And he's inhibited by the courts from truly pursuing the agenda he was voted into office to pursue. And so it's a really awful situation for the people in Europe, and it's sad and depressing, and but it does all read like a Babylon Bee article. It really does. You can't parody this stuff because it's so absurd on its face, and it's all motivated by this pursuit of net zero, which everyone I think today acknowledges is an impossibility and isn't going to happen. And yet we, the policymakers just keep rushing headlong into this insanity. So that's my conspiracy theory for the day.
That's because they're being so stupid about it. And if we're talking politics, they missed Geert Wilders. They missed him. They didn't pay attention, so they missed him. And now they're, compensating for that by banning Georgescu or sentencing Marine Le Pen to house arrest and being unable to run for office. But the stupidity. I just paid my car tax today. It was much higher than the tax I paid last year, but that's okay because last year I paid for another city, and cities, regions set their own taxes. But EV drivers, EV owners do not pay taxes. They do not pay for parking. So if the idea is to get us all on EVs, we've discussed this before numerous times, nobody will be paying car taxes. Nobody will be paying for parking. You will need, as some governments have already realized in, for example, New Zealand, you will need to impose some form of taxation on EV owners. And this will immediately lead, as it did in New Zealand, to a decline in EV sales. So what they're trying to do is impossible, but they're still trying to do it. And I know, David, you believe that they're essentially evil. I believe they're essentially stupid. They're trying to do things that could never work. It's more dangerous. Stupidity is a lot more dangerous because they do not have any actual idea what they're doing. They're trying this and that, and when it fails, they either double down or change it a bit and try again. And this is what's happening with the EVs. They so want Europeans on EVs, in EVs, that they're ready to make a deal with China to get more EVs, even though they're being belligerent about China.
It's bizarre. It's like a Jekyll and Hyde or some kind of schizophrenic thing going on that there's one side, right? I mean, it's crazy. And what I was thinking with respect to this new floor price for Chinese EVs is that maybe they decided because Trump's using the word tariff all the time, Europe didn't, they wanted to take away the tariff because otherwise, how could they be criticizing Trump if they're putting 1,000% tariff on
Well,
Chinese
yes,
EVs?
but they were talking about setting tariffs on Chinese imports that will be redirected from the United States. They just said this last week, and they did use the word tariff because, you know, all these Chinese goods that can no longer be economically and profitably exported to the US, they were freaking out in Brussels that all this will be redirected to the European Union. And we need to protect local products, so we will tariff them. But now they want to make an EV deal.
Yeah, it's, I know.
I got about 19,000 different questions, but Christopher Messina, David, that one you popped up just a second ago was
Yeah,
fantastic.
this is a good one, actually. Yeah.
Christopher
They're all
Messina
good.
wrote the Messina's federal budget book, and it's actually fantastic.
It's fantastic.
Yeah.
And what a great thing. Insurance, EV cars are having double your insurance as soon as the moment you buy an insurance. I got into my father-in-law's brand new Tesla. That thing's beautiful. And I want to set the difference between Tesla and the rest of the world. Tesla can be profitable because I think Teslas will be able to help older drivers keep their driver's licenses longer. And that's a value add that you really can't have. I drove my dad's brand new Ford 150. It has lane control.
The lane assist,
Lane assist. Holy smokes, Batman. Between Abilene and Oklahoma, it had 1 mile that it actually worked because of the painted line. So Ford does not have it down to the side. Auto driving and going and saying, hey, the thing goes, where do you want it to park? It'll even come get you. It'll haul your groceries in. Unbelievable. You know, when you get a robot made by Tesla, you got to sit back and go, Tesla is not just a car company. And that, I think it makes a huge difference. David, I just want to give a shout out to LinkedIn for shutting you down today.
Did they shut me down?
Well, they didn't shut you down totally. We are looking at viewers on YouTube, on Tammy's YouTube, on my LinkedIn, or my X, not my LinkedIn. And I've got 36 views of people on my X. So that leaves very few for your normal. You've got 17,000 followers on LinkedIn.
They throttle me on a pretty regular basis over there. They're a bunch of evil bastards. I don't know, and they won't explain why. I ask every time I notice it, but they refuse to explain why because they know they can't justify what they're doing, and they're essentially an organized crime operation. But it is what it is.
I'd share that beautiful ray of sunshine out this morning since I've got my hat blocking the blinding light of the incoming sun. So.
Well, you know, David had sent around this, I think he put it on his Substack today, where of the top 4 EV, there's all these different EV companies in the world, and only 4 of them are profitable. 3 are from China, and number 1 is Tesla. And so it's ironic that, you know, all the lefties were celebrating Tesla, you know, virtue signaling when they bought one and saying, "Yay, I'm in my EV, I'm saving the planet." And now because they hate Musk, they want to kill the company. And it's like the only non-Chinese company that's profitable. And you know, the other 3 are BYD and a couple of other Chinese ones that are really pushing to be part of the EU market and everything. And I know in the UK there's people in certain newspapers that often write articles, when can we have Chinese EVs? They're so much more affordable and better than the ones that our manufacturers are making. And to me, that's Yeah, and it's just like, well, why is that?
Yeah.
And
When you can use slave labor, you can make cars cheaper. Hey, who would have
well, and
guessed?
if you have an entirely integrated supply chain,
Yeah.
so when you
And
control
coal.
right,
And lots of
and
coal.
cool.
Do we think, and I want to, this is a real question because as we sit back and take a look at the EVs, Jay Leno he has one in his plant or in his auto museum that is running since 1906. I believe there were 30,000 of these things, 35,000 of these in New York City. And there were charging stations all over the city. How come we couldn't have improved between 1909 and now? And in the Biden administration, David, was it 30 or $7 billion and we got one charging station? I think
eight charging stations, but 3 of them were broken.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
But yet here, I'm going to bring this up without the sound on this. This is
1909 Baker Electric. That's quite an ornate interior. Well, here's the trouble with electric cars. The idea was they really appealed to women because at the time, the self-starter hadn't been invented yet. Steam was a hassle, and steam was dirty and messy and scary. Regular automobiles, you had to hand crank and bang and set the choke and work the clutch. These were popular as women's shopping cars. So what they did was they really marketed them to women. They made it look like a woman's sitting room. You have the flowers, you see the clock, and there's a makeup. But then the problem was, well, no man wanted to buy a woman's car. I mean, that was the problem with it. But this thing went 100 miles on a charge. At the turn of the century, there were 15,000 of them in New York City. There were charging stations all over the city. This is your tiller right here. This is what you steer with. You release your handbrake and you turn your key. And away we go.
Yeah.
I'm trying to imagine how bumpy that would have been on the roads in 1909.
Yeah, because there's no springs, no shock absorbers. It's just an axle with tires on it. Yeah. And of course, all cars were like that.
But it does look like a salon.
It does.
Yes.
It's like one of those old train cars.
Now, was that women drivers or women's marketing? I'm not sure which one killed the EV. So if we have no EVs now, it's because of the women.
Well, but it's also it's because they had
I'm not stating a fact.
But they had the same limiting factors 119 years ago. That was 1906. They were actually introduced in the late 1800s. That exists today. This industry has been subsidized for the last 30 years, trillions of dollars, and they still can't solve the same limiting factors that existed in 1906, okay, which is range, infrastructure, and technology, battery technology. And they still haven't solved for that in all these years. So what makes us think over the next 25 years they're going to be able to solve for all that? It's insanity to think that we're all going to be driving electric cars 25 years from now. Some people will be. Wealthy people who like the virtue signal will be driving them. But the rest of us are either going to be driving internal combustion engines or we're going to be walking everywhere we go, taking public transit.
Hybrid, but that's a whole different animal. But one of the questions I really am trying to figure out is I don't know the answer to this, and is the EU and the UK and the trade is tied to net zero. And so when we sit back and take a look, this is a complicated formula. And as President Trump, I've got President Trump and all of the people lined up. There's 90 countries now. I got a video of that. I'm not sure. The White House just released this. So this is President Trump and all the countries, right? Okay.
Oh, so Ryan's in deep trouble.
I showed that to my wife, and she just laughed and says, I've done that to you. And I said, how'd that work out for you? And so, not very good. She actually hosed me down. And
Well, I was thinking about when you were talking about the chargers in the turn of the century. And I wonder if one of the problems is that demand for electricity went up so significantly that it could no longer accommodate the chargers and what people were using in the city.
Yeah.
Maybe. Because
While
that's one of the
oil was
problems.
becoming abundant.
Right.
Yeah.
And oil was becoming abundant. It was easier, more portable.
A lot cheaper. Yeah.
A lot cheaper. You could carry a jerry can with you, whatever, if you're on a going outside the city or whatever.
Jeff brings up a great point that follows along with what you had just mentioned, the cost.
Yeah. So Jeff says, and worse, the cost experience is used to justify the increase in rates for the general customer base, an unintended consequence of the EV push by the leftists. And Messy Time said the only two people he knows who have been permanently banned from LinkedIn. I would add Joseph Fournier onto there.
Joseph Fournier.
And he was banned without even knowing why, and no idea. So he's now on Substack and X. So.
David Ramsden Wood was temporarily banned a few years ago by LinkedIn for essentially, posting what we're saying on this podcast. He managed to get back in, but then quit because he was so pissed off at him, and I don't blame him. And it's a big loss for LinkedIn. Somebody like DRW, Joseph Fournier, gets outright banned for no reason that they're willing to say.
Yeah.
And it's just a deceitful operation from beginning to end.
DRW is a cool cat, and I've enjoyed my 5 or 6 podcast interviews with him. He is an interesting guy.
Okay, so is there anything more you all want to add to this subject about Europe's net zero?
You brought up a great thing, and I think when we see climate alarmism funded by USAID and everything else has really involved the world's energy policies around the world. And when you sit back and think climate alarmism equals net zero equals energy policies, and where energy policies get totally sidetracked, what happens is deindustrialization. When you have deindustrialization, you have financial crisis and everything else. And Tammy, you shared with us this morning the map of the EU steel production sites. This is a fantastic discussion of deindustrialization, and your thoughts on that, because I want to make sure we shared that first.
Right. So when we're talking about what was going on with the UK British Steel being owned by China, and they're supposed to transition away from using coking coal to make new steel, but to have electric arc furnaces. So right now, the British Steel plant has blast furnaces, but they're supposed to be retooled to have electric arc furnaces. And this is also the issue with Tata Steel, who owns another foundry in the UK. So we have an Indian conglomerate and a Chinese company owning British Steel assets. But in any event, they're supposed to shut that down as part of net zero and convert everything to electric arc furnaces. And so what's interesting about this one, it does include the UK on there, but you'll see there's like hardly any of the blast furnaces left. You can see that most of the steel making facilities in the European Union, including the UK, are predominantly electric arc furnaces. And when you're using the electricity, then that's another demand for electricity that increases prices for everybody, because there just isn't enough reliable electricity there. So it'll be interesting if people have comments, what they think about this kind of chart. What do you guys think about all the, like, if you look on the right, the blue, all the electric arc furnaces there? What do you think this means for the ability for the European Union to actually make the armaments they say that they need in order to fight off a potential Russian boogeyman?
Well, they're going to have to import a lot of steel from China to do that. Yeah.
And they'll have the carbon border adjustment mechanism in order to make that more expensive as well.
Yeah,
And that kicks in
exactly.
next year.
Exactly. They're going to tax themselves.
The
Yeah.
Babylon Bee strikes again.
Well, Irina, what do you think of this? I'm trying to see where Bulgaria is on that map, and if you guys have.
To the right of Italy, right up there.
Yeah.
But I'm surprised there's so many electric furnaces still making in Europe.
It's a lot of recycled steel. I mean, at least
A
you
lot of
can.
recycled steel. Yeah.
That is true, but do we actually produce any primary steel?
Not much.
Not much. That would be like the blast furnace and basic oxygen and the blast furnaces.
And coking
Lots of
coal.
blast furnaces, but it's not looking good if you want to rearm from scratch, which is what they're trying to do because they sent everything to the Ukraine. So
And California is not
exactly.
exempt from the Germany EU deindustrialization because the green policies, David, have been actually entertaining. They're using more coal now than when they were years ago.
Who?
And it's
California?
California, because of their cement manufacturing plants, and they are using more coal now. It is still being used in California. No power.
I don't think no power stations are fired by
There is
coal.
not any power
No,
stations.
no power.
They're importing coal from Nevada is the closest coal plant.
Yeah.
But they are still using coal and they cannot get away from it.
No, they can't get away from it, and probably the percentage is going to rise in the coming years as you know. I mean, I just think we're going to start building more coal plants here pretty soon in the United States.
Yeah.
We already have one permitted, David, in Alaska.
Yeah.
That was quick.
Didn't take long, did it?
Well, okay. So why don't we start with David's stories? Stu, can we do that?
My stories, okay.
Sorry, let me find them. I think that would be. I got to get a better mouse.
There we go.
I need a cat.
There I am. So we had we had a lot of interesting developments last week. The first one is Brian Sheffield, who's the son of Scott Sheffield, former CEO of Pioneer Natural Resources. And Brian is a big Permian Basin shale pioneer in his own right. Advised his peers in the industry last week to stop drilling and hunker down in this environment that's currently happening with the Trump tariffs and the falling oil prices. There's a general belief, I think, in the Permian Basin among the major producers there, and probably the independents too, that prices are already below break even in the Permian, which means they're well below break even in other oil shale basins in the United States. And I don't think it was a coincidence that last week we saw the largest single week drop in the active rig count in the United States, according to Baker Hughes, since June of 2023. Okay. And I think the rig count is going to start dropping, is going to continue to drop here over the next 90 days as, we find out and gain some surety around where oil prices are going to go in the wake of these tariff negotiations. So that was a big story, I think. And then the other one is A Day in the Life of Trump and His Energy and Climate Team is absolutely glorious. This is a piece I wrote at my Substack. So one of the problems, and I think we're all experiencing it in covering energy right now, is there are so many things happening on a daily basis. You just can't keep up with it all. So I just went back in this piece and looked at some of the things the Trump administration had announced on Friday alone. And it's amazing in a single day, the number of major actions they took to reverse regulations and edicts and executive orders and all sorts of different things out of the Biden administration. And I think the only conclusion that I was trying to get everyone to understand here is This is completely different from the first Trump presidency. In the first Trump presidency, we had, they did a lot of good work and made headway in reversing a portion of what the damage Obama had done in energy and climate policy over the previous 8 years. But it wasn't anything like what we're seeing now, because in his first presidency, Trump didn't expect to win that election. And so he did not, have this big pool of senior advisor nominees to put in place who were loyal to him, believed in the agenda, and were competent to get those jobs done. And so a lot of things that just went unaddressed in that first presidency. This time is different. His whole cabinet is people who believe in the agenda. They're all incredibly smart, competent people who hit the ground running, like Chris Wright at Energy and Doug Burgum at Interior and Lee Zeldin at EPA. They hit the ground running. They had their agenda in place 3 months before they actually got sworn into office. And so they were able to just hit the ground running, start doing all these things. What we're having in this presidency, this second Trump presidency, is a true revolution in energy and climate policy. And by the end of this 4-year period, he's going to have completely reset the United States position on energy and climate policy. And the globalists in Europe and everywhere else around the world are going to hate every bit of it. So, everyone can form their own opinions about whether it's good or bad or indifferent, but it is what it is. This is a real, true sea change in the U.S. position on energy and climate policy. And I suspect that's going to have cascading impacts all over the world because of, the predominance of the U.S. economy on the global stage. So it's a big deal. And that's all I was trying to communicate there. I'm so serious today. I can't understand. That's all.
In your Substack?
Substack is, let's see here, blackman.substack.com, the energy transition absurdities Substack that I wish I could rename, but if I did that, I'd have to reset the whole thing. So anyway.
Oh, dear. Yeah.
Why would you want to rename something that's actually accurate?
Well,
Yeah.
because the transition doesn't exist. I would like to rename it Energy Absurdities, but because the transition isn't happening.
But
Okay.
it's absurd to think that we're in a transition, so I
That's
think it's
true.
actually
Okay.
accurate.
In and of itself, it's an absurdity. Yes.
Because they keep talking net zero transition and all that.
Yeah,
So
they keep
it's
talking it.
okay.
Sorry, I'm just trying to talk you into making you feel good about yourself.
Okay, I feel better. Thank you, Stu.
Irina.
Oh yeah, two of my favorite stories. The first one, Ørsted urges Europe to act to avert wind energy downward spiral. Ørsted is asking for more money. Otherwise,
course.
it will die. Because the wind power industry is unprofitable. It will continue to be unprofitable because I don't see the supply chain bottlenecks going away. They're still talking about supply chain bottlenecks, people. What is this? It's 2025 and they're still talking about these bottlenecks. I think this is just a knee-jerk explanation of why prices are so high. So yeah, they're openly, the chief executive of Ørsted is openly asking for more money just because the European governments or whoever who doles out the money, they have to commit to annual support.
Yeah.
It's like some kind of alimony. Only
He sounds
they're
just like the
not
previous
supposed to,
Ørsted CEO, right? Exactly the same thing.
Yeah, they keep asking for more, and they think they are due. They deserve this money, which is
Yep.
amazing. And they, again, being stupid, they don't think that even if the European Union or national governments make this commitment, they will run out of money. And what happens then? It's It's mind-boggling to me.
Does Orsted believe it's too big to fail? Do
I
they think they're like
they see themselves this way, yeah, because downward spiral. Support us or we're dead, and apparently we mustn't die, because he actually talked about energy security and affordability. Can you believe this?
yeah,
If Europe wants energy security and affordability, give us more money.
yeah.
Goodness
They're saying
gracious.
that in the UK as well. Yeah.
No shame whatsoever.
Nope.
And my favorite gloat piece: Trump has a $350 billion deal for Europe. Buy our energy. Now, I wrote about this on Substack, but I would like to vocalize it now. 3 years ago, when the European Union was celebrating its independence from Russian gas and how Russia was so unreliable, it never actually stopped the gas flows, except when the Ukraine forgot to pay its transit fees twice. But that was just the Ukrainian pipe. Nord Stream never stopped. But anyway, Russia was unreliable because Russia is bad. We now have a reliable partner in the face of the United States, and LNG will flow to Europe at affordable prices, which turned out to be a lie just a few months later when everyone said, wait, it's just very expensive. Do we need to keep buying it? Yes, because somebody bombed the Nord Stream. But they kept on this. It's a reliable partner. We can rely on the US. No, you can't. You can't rely on anyone, regardless of how friendly a relationship you've had for however many decades. Again, we see this infantile perception about geopolitics and the assumption that just because things have been going so well for a very long time, they will keep going well. The people in charge of Europe has no awareness of the fact that the world is a dynamic place. Geopolitics, international relations are a dynamic, not an industry. I was going to say industry. It's not an industry. It's a dynamic process. And as one Substack reader quoted to me, the British foreign policy philosophy from the end of the 19th century, I believe, there are no friends. There are just interests.
Yeah.
I forgot the name
Yeah.
of the politician. But this is exactly how things are. If you think you have sincere friends in the face of other countries, you really are second-grade mentality. I'm sorry, it doesn't have to be nice. It's not nice. It's just true. So now they're getting exactly what they deserve. I'm done.
I like Messy Times comment there, Stu. Messy Times, Christopher Messina says, to be fair, offshore wind is zero sum. Humans get electricity, albeit insanely expensive, and
That's
whales
so
get to die.
true.
Yes, exactly. But we're not supposed to notice the whales dying.
Well, it doesn't matter if it's for offshore wind. If it was an oil spill that killed a mackerel, then we would be,
Oh,
very
my
sad.
gosh. Yeah.
Yeah. And Irina, your Substack?
My Substack is Irina Slav Energy.
And it's fabulous.
It's fabulous.
I can't wait to read A Bad Day at Brussels. I don't know what that's about, but I'm going to go read it when we're done.
It was fun. There are many bad days in Brussels lately.
So there's a couple of stories today from me, and one is there's a couple of different plants, EV plants, that are going to be shut down in Canada, and one is in Ingersoll, which is a GM plant. But actually, GM is shutting down their EV plants in both Canada and the United States due to lack of demand and everything. But what's really fascinating about this one is that they were making these little EV delivery vans. And so now all the labor unions or the socialist NDP party are saying that Canada Post should be buying these EV vans so that the company won't have to shut down and all this kind of thing. The problem is that they're quite expensive, not so reliable when it's really cold out, the usual stuff. And then there was another plant still, I forget the, let me see if I get the Linamar, and they were given $169 million from the Canadian federal government to build a new facility in Welland. And within a few days of receiving the money, they put it up for sale. They put the plant up for sale. And what's happening, I'm not sure, but it was like there's $169 million out the window. And then the Parliamentary Budget Office in Canada had put together this little report last year, and so this is from last year, where the total Canadian government support for various EV initiatives is up to $52 billion. The total investment from what companies have put in is $46 billion. And then the provincial government has put forward money as well. So government funding $52 billion, and the investment of the companies themselves is $46 billion. So Canada can't apparently meet its NATO commitment, but it can throw $52 billion at various EV initiatives. And that doesn't even count for how much money they're throwing at charging facilities, just like they did with the United States. I don't know how many they built. They put a bunch of money towards it. Not sure what the outcome was. Kind of like the Canada said they're going to plant 2 trillion trees or something, and they've spent millions and millions, probably billions of dollars, and there's like, I think they planted like 2 million trees or something, which is hilarious because we have this amazing forestry industry. And some forestry experts who took a look at the government plan is just like, wow, this is a waste of money. We could have done this. We could have planted 2 trillion trees fairly quickly at a reasonable rate. But the government didn't want to talk to forestry companies. So
of course not.
Of course not. And then I want to give a shout out to Terence Corcoran, who's a veteran columnist with the Financial Post. He's always got a really good take on things. And Mark Carney announced his energy plan last week when he was in, I think, Calgary or Edmonton. And it's funny because they were talking about Canada's going to be a clean superpower. Clean is the operative word. And he talks about how if a project is of national interest, the approvals will be expedited and everything else. But when you look at the backgrounder, conventional energy, that's oil and gas and coal, is mentioned in the last sentence once. And it was kind of a throwaway. Oh yeah, conventional as well as clean. But everything else in the 2-page backgrounder of what the policy would be is all about clean energy. So it'll be expediting wind and solar. They want to build an east to west national grid in Canada. And then there was this ridiculous idea that I sent around. I didn't get a chance to send it to Stu, where they're going to build a transatlantic interconnection. Transatlantic for energy. I mean, and like, it's great because when it's producing in Europe and it's nighttime there, it'll be just in time for when people in Canada are waking up or whatever, and when demand is high in Canada. So it's great. It'll all balance out. So there's this ridiculous plan to build a giant green power line under the Atlantic to make us dependent, to make Canada dependent on the European Union for electricity. It makes no sense.
That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard, because even to transport electricity just halfway across the state of Texas, 300 miles, you've got about a 20% line loss.
Yeah.
What's the line loss percentage going to be on a transatlantic energy cable? It's going to be 70-80%.
Yeah, it's ultra high voltage something called
and
NATO.
Europe won't be producing consistently. Europe will only be producing while the sun shines.
Yeah.
And how many Chinese dark fleet folks are out there that drag anchors across these lines? This is absolutely, Taiwan has now got 3 or 4 major data cable lines out because of the Chinese anchors accidentally dropping and dragging them through their lines. Mm-hmm.
Messy Times has the scheme. He's figured it out. Pre-cooked seafood will just bubble up to the surface.
Anyway, those are my things for today. I just thought that transatlantic interconnection, mean, people are already complaining about, oh, we need to be more energy secure and produce our own energy and whatever. And Canada's got an abundance of resources, and we're going to go and get electricity from Europe. It's just, they can't even get enough for themselves. Like, what a joke.
Yep.
So yeah, this is my Substack, the nemethReport.substack.com. And I put my podcasts up there and put different articles on there. So check it out if you have an opportunity.
I saw you were interviewing Robert Bryce just recently. That was pretty cool.
Yeah, we had a conversation last week, and yeah, it was fantastic. We talked about
cool.
his
Good
stuff.
job.
Yeah.
Okay, and then we've already covered mine, but the energy storage market is getting clobbered by the tariff wars. I actually saw Felicity Broadshock on oilprice.com put out a nice one, so I went ahead and asked Grok on X, which Grok 3.0 is actually doing pretty good.
It is.
About what is actually going to be it, and tariffs on global steel and aluminum imports, increased cost of battery enclosures, rack, grid infrastructure. Steel is 75% of the wind turbine mass. The green energy and tariffs are absolutely going to die. But where we're going to have a major problem is land reclamation in the United States for all of the energy projects that are dying not having maintenance, because the wind energy system is 4 years. They get extra subsidies. They replace the turbines under a upgrade nameplate so they can then use that. That whole scheme is gone. So we're going to see wind farms starting to fail dramatically. Who's going to pay for that? And I want that to come up. We've already talked about this one.
That's a great point about the cleanup, Stu.
Yes.
Especially when they were anticipating they could use all that subsidy money to upgrade or whatever. So yeah, that's important, especially for landowners.
Yes, and there's no regulations to govern any of it.
And all you have to do, it's at least the oil and gas industry has had time and it's getting better at it. Yes, the orphan well projects are a problem, but there are funds available, and yes, it is. Yeah. And I'm honestly working on a nonprofit trying to figure out, because if the government's going to be handing out money, I might as well make some kind of money making good for land reclamation on this. I see this as a potential business. You can find me on energynewsbeat.co or theenergynewsbeat.substack.com. And I got one more, because I think that President Trump and President Xi just released a negotiation. I'm not sure which one was which, but you know, hey.
That's funny.
Nothing better than a good cat video.
I love the cat videos, of course. But you know, China in retaliation for the terrorists was trying to mock the administration by making those little AI videos of Trump and Americans working on the lines to make shoes. And I kept thinking the Republicans and the Americans should just own that and be like, best shoes ever.
They were hilarious, yeah.
Exactly.
Well, Tammy, have you seen President Trump's shoe line?
Oh, I've heard about that.
Oh
no,
my
I haven't.
God, yes.
I haven't looked at it.
They are very expensive, and I guarantee you, don't tease President Trump with anything. He will do it.
He'll have it on market the next day.
Exactly.
Yeah,
and people
for sure.
will buy them.
Yeah, he should fix those videos and have them making his shoes, him and JD Vance.
Yeah.
That would be pretty funny. Well, thanks everybody for all the great comments today, and I hope you all have a great week.
Thank you.
See you guys next
This
week.
was fun. See y'all next week.
See you next